The blizzard hit just as Bella Frost's water broke, and she knew with a sinking certainty that she would die alone in the February cold of 1882. She had been traveling by wagon from Baker City to Pendleton, Oregon, desperate to reach her sister before the baby came. But the storm had descended like a white curtain across the Blue Mountains, and her horse had spooked at the thunder of wind, breaking free from the traces and disappearing into the whiteness. Now she lay in the back of the wagon, her body racked with contractions that came faster and harder with each passing hour, her screams swallowed by the howling wind. The canvas cover provided little protection against the cold that seeped through her bones, and she could feel the wagon slowly being buried under the mounting snow. Bella was 22 years old and completely alone. Her husband had died 3 months earlier in a mining accident, crushed under a cave in that had taken 7 other men with him. She had no money, no home, and now a baby coming in the worst blizzard Oregon had seen in a decade. She pressed her hands against her swollen belly and wept, not from the pain but from the terrible knowledge that her child would likely die with her, never taking a first breath, never knowing warmth or love or sunlight. The contraction that seized her then was so powerful that she arched off the wagon bed, her fingers clawing at the rough wood, and she heard a sound that might have been a scream or might have been a prayer. Through the roaring in her ears, through the wind and her own desperate gasping, she heard something else: hoofbeats, the solid thud of a horse moving through deep snow, and then a voice, deep and urgent, calling out, "Hello, is someone there?" Bella tried to answer, but another contraction stole her voice. She heard the horse whinny, heard boots hitting the ground, and then the canvas was being pulled back, and a man's face appeared, snow-covered and wind-burned, his eyes widening as he took in the scene before him. Elijah Kane had been riding for 2 days straight, trying to reach Pendleton before the storm made travel impossible, when he'd spotted the half-buried wagon. He was a cattleman, 30 years old, with a ranch 20 miles south of town, and he'd seen enough of life and death on the frontier to know trouble when he saw it. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of the young woman in the wagon, her face pale and twisted with pain, her dress soaked with sweat despite the freezing cold, clearly in the throes of labor. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, and then he was climbing into the wagon, his large frame filling the small space. "Madam, I'm Elijah. I'm going to help you. Can you hear me?" Bella's eyes focused on him with difficulty. He had dark hair plastered to his forehead, a strong jaw rough with several days' stubble, and eyes that were a deep brown, filled with a concern that made something in her chest tighten even through the pain. "The baby," she gasped. "It's coming. I can't stop it." "You don't need to stop it," Elijah said, his voice steady even though his heart was hammering. He'd helped birth calves and foals, but never a human child. Still, he could see she had no choice, and neither did he. "We're going to do this together. What's your name?" "Bella," she managed, and then her body seized again and she reached out blindly. Elijah's hand was there instantly, large and calloused and warm, wrapping around hers with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such a big man. "Squeeze as hard as you need to, Bella," he said, and began pulling off his heavy coat. The temperature in the wagon was brutally cold, but he worked quickly, using his coat and the blankets he found in the wagon to create some semblance of warmth. He lit the small lantern hanging from the wagon's frame, and in its flickering light he could see how young she was, how frightened, and how utterly exhausted. "How long have you been laboring?" he asked, keeping his voice calm while his mind raced through everything he knew about birthing animals and praying it would be enough. "Since morning," Bella whispered. "Maybe longer. I don't know any more. Everything hurts." That meant hours. Elijah felt a cold fist of fear grip his stomach, but he pushed it down. "Where were you headed, Pendleton? My sister lives there. My husband died. I had nowhere else to go." The words came in gasps between contractions, and Elijah could see her strength was fading fast. "Listen to me, Bella," he said, moving closer and taking both her hands in his. "You're not alone anymore. I'm right here, and I'm not leaving until your baby is born safe and sound. Do you understand me?" She looked into his eyes and saw something there that made her want to believe him. This stranger with his solid presence and his warm hands and his voice that cut through her terror like sunlight through storm clouds. She nodded, unable to speak, and gripped his hands as another contraction built. Elijah had seen his share of difficult situations. He'd fought off rustlers, survived a stampede that had killed 2 of his men, and once spent 3 days trapped in a canyon with a broken leg before help arrived. But watching Bella struggle to bring life into the world while the storm raged outside tested him in ways he'd never experienced. It wasn't fear for himself, it was fear for her, for this woman he'd just met, but who seemed suddenly to matter more than anything else in the world. He positioned himself at the foot of the wagon and tried to remember everything he'd learned on the ranch. "I need to check and see how far along you are," he said, his face flushing despite the cold. "I know this isn't proper, but there's no other way." Bella was beyond caring about propriety. She nodded weakly and let him examine her, closing her eyes against the embarrassment that seemed so trivial compared to the pain and fear. Elijah's hands were surprisingly gentle, and when he looked up at her his expression was both relieved and concerned. "The baby's coming," he said. "Soon. When the next contraction hits, I need you to push as hard as you can. Can you do that?" "I don't think I can," Bella sobbed. "I'm so tired. I can't do this." Elijah moved back up to her side and cupped her face in his hands, making her look at him. "Yes, you can. You're the strongest woman I've ever seen, Bella Frost. You've survived losing your husband, you've traveled through the mountains alone, and you're about to bring a child into this world in the middle of a blizzard. You can do anything." Something in his words, in the absolute conviction in his eyes, gave Bella strength she didn't know she possessed. When the next contraction came, she pushed with everything she had, her hand crushing Elijah's, her screams echoing in the small space. He stayed beside her, his free hand on her forehead, speaking words of encouragement that she barely heard but that anchored her to consciousness. "That's it. You're doing so well," he said, then moved back to help guide the baby. "I can see the head, Bella. One more push, maybe 2. You're almost there." The pain was beyond anything Bella had imagined, a tearing, burning sensation that consumed her entire being. But Elijah's voice was there, steady and sure, and his hand was holding hers, and she pushed again with a strength born of desperation and hope. And then there was a different sound in the wagon. A thin, reedy cry that cut through the wind and the pain and everything else. Bella's eyes flew open, and she saw Elijah holding a tiny, red-faced creature, his hands enormous around the fragile body. His face was transformed, wonder and relief and something else she couldn't name shining in his eyes. "It's a boy," he said, his voice thick. "You have a son, Bella." He worked quickly, using his knife to cut the cord and wrapping the baby in his flannel shirt, then laying the child on Bella's chest. The baby was small and covered in vernix, his cries lusty and strong, and Bella felt tears streaming down her face as she held him for the first time. "Hello, little one," she whispered, and the baby's eyes opened, unfocused but searching, and she fell in love with a completeness that staggered her. Elijah watched them, and something shifted in his chest. He'd spent the last 10 years building his ranch, working from dawn until dusk, focused on nothing but survival and success. He'd never had time for courting or thoughts of family. Women in town had shown interest, but he'd always been too busy, too focused, too content with his solitary life. But looking at Bella with her newborn son, her face exhausted but radiant in the lantern light, he felt something crack open inside him that he'd kept locked away for so long he'd forgotten it existed. "He's perfect," Elijah said softly, and Bella looked up at him with eyes full of gratitude and tears. "Thank you," she said. "You saved our lives. I don't know how to ever repay you." "You don't owe me anything," Elijah said, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from her face. He forced himself to focus on practicalities. "We need to get you warm and get this bleeding under control. Then we need to figure out how to get out of this storm." He cleaned her up as best he could, trying to preserve her dignity while making sure she wasn't hemorrhaging. The afterbirth had come, which was good, and while she was bleeding it didn't seem excessive. He wrapped her in every blanket he could find, including his bedroll that he retrieved from his horse, and made sure the baby was tucked against her skin for warmth. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, the wind had picked up, and Elijah could hear the dangerous creak of tree branches heavy with snow. The wagon was nearly buried now, which actually helped with insulation, but they couldn't stay here forever. Bella needed real shelter, hot food, medical attention. "How far are we from town?" Bella asked, her voice drowsy. She was crashing from the adrenaline, her body desperate for sleep. "Too far to travel tonight in this weather," Elijah said. "But I passed a line shack about a mile back. It's rough, but it has a stove and walls. If the storm breaks by morning, I can get you there." "And if it doesn't break," Elijah met her eyes and saw the fear there. "Then we waited out here. I've got supplies on my horse. We'll be all right." But he wasn't sure they would be. The cold was seeping in despite their best efforts, and Bella had lost blood and needed rest and food. The baby seemed healthy now, but newborns were fragile, especially in conditions like these. Elijah settled beside Bella, pulling the blankets around all three of them, and let his body heat add to the warmth. "Tell me about your ranch," Bella said softly, fighting sleep because she was afraid if she closed her eyes she might not wake up. Elijah understood what she was doing and obliged her. "It's in the foothills, good grazing land with a creek that runs year-round. I've got about 200 head of cattle plus horses. Built the house and barn myself over 5 years. It's not fancy, but it's solid. Good land." "It sounds wonderful," Bella said. "I've never had a real home. We moved around a lot when I was young, following work. Then I married Robert and we lived in a boarding house near the mines. I always dreamed of having a place with a garden, maybe some chickens." "Your sister in Pendleton, she has a home there. She married a shopkeeper. They have a nice house in town. She wrote to me after Robert died, told me to come live with them." Bella's voice cracked. "I didn't want to be a burden, but I had nowhere else to go." Elijah felt anger on her behalf, anger at a world that left a pregnant widow with so few options. "You're not a burden, Bella. You're a woman who's had some hard luck, but that doesn't define you." She looked at him wonderingly. "How can you know that? You just met me." "I know what I see," Elijah said simply. "I see a woman with courage enough to travel alone through mountain passes in winter. I see a mother who just fought through the hardest thing a person can do in the worst possible conditions and survived. That tells me everything I need to know." Bella felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the blankets. She studied Elijah's face in the lantern light, the strong features and honest eyes, the gentle way he held himself near her and the baby as if afraid he might frighten them. He was handsome, but more than that, he was kind. She'd known few kind men in her life. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you have family?" "Not anymore," Elijah said. "My parents died of fever when I was 19. I worked on other people's ranches for years, saving every penny until I could buy my own land. I've got ranch hands who work for me, good men, but no family to speak of. That sounds lonely. It has been, Elijah admitted, surprised at his own honesty. But I told myself I was too busy for loneliness. Ranching takes all your time, all your energy. There's always something that needs doing. But you're not working now, Bella said softly. You're here with us. I can't think of anywhere else I'd rather be, Elijah said, and realized he meant it with a fierceness that surprised him. They fell silent, listening to the storm and the baby's soft breathing. Bella drifted in and out of sleep, and each time she woke Elijah was there, watching over them, adding wood to a small fire he'd managed to build in a metal pan to add extra warmth without setting the wagon ablaze. He fed her water and the dried beef he'd had in his saddlebag, and made sure the baby was nursing properly. As dawn approached, gray and dim through the storm, Elijah made a decision. The weather's not getting better. I'm going to ride to the line shack and make sure it's ready, then come back for you. I can rig a travois to get you there. Don't leave, Bella said, sudden panic in her voice. Please, what if something happens? Nothing's going to happen, Elijah said firmly. But we can't stay in this wagon another night. You need real shelter. He took her hand and held it tight. I will come back for you, Bella. I swear it on my life. She searched his eyes and saw the truth there. All right, she whispered. Elijah bundled up, making sure Bella had every blanket and his coat. He checked on his horse, a sturdy roan gelding named Buck, who had weathered the storm with stoic patience, and swung into the saddle. The ride to the line shack was brutal, the snow deep and the wind cutting, but he made it in under an hour. The cabin was a rough structure built for cowboys working the range, but it had a roof, walls, and a stove. Elijah got a fire going and made sure there was wood stacked inside, then headed back to the wagon. Bella had been praying the entire time he was gone, her son clutched to her chest, terrified that Elijah wouldn't return or that something would happen to him. When she heard Buck's hoofbeats, relief flooded through her so powerfully she wept. Elijah fashioned a travois from branches and rope, lined it with blankets, and carefully moved Bella and the baby onto it. The journey to the line shack was slow and difficult, but Elijah led Buck with steady patience, and finally, they were inside the warm cabin. He settled Bella on the narrow cot, making sure she and the baby were comfortable, then set about making the place as livable as possible. He melted snow for water, heated beans and bacon over the stove, and even managed to make weak coffee. Bella ate ravenously, surprised by her hunger, and felt strength slowly returning to her body. You should name him, Elijah said, watching the baby sleep. Bella smiled. I've been thinking about that. My father's name was Samuel. I thought I might call him Sam. Sam, Elijah repeated, testing it. That's a good, strong name. Sam Frost, Bella said, and then her face fell. He'll never know his father. Robert died before I even knew I was pregnant. Sam will grow up without knowing where he came from. He'll know he came from a mother who loved him enough to cross mountains in winter to give him a better life, Elijah said. And he'll know that he came into this world during a blizzard, and that his first breath was a fighter's breath. Those are good things to know. Bella looked at Elijah with wonder. You have a way with words for a cattleman. I read a lot during the long winters, Elijah said with a small smile. Books are good company when you're snowed in for weeks at a time. They spent 3 days in the line shack, waiting for the storm to break. 3 days that felt outside of normal time, suspended in a small, warm space while the world raged white and wild beyond the walls. Elijah cared for Bella with a tenderness that made her throat tight, bringing her food and water, helping her when she needed to move, never complaining about the cramped quarters or the inconvenience. And they talked. Hours and hours of talking, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Bella learned that Elijah had a love for poetry, that he could recite entire passages of Whitman and Tennyson from memory. He learned that she had a beautiful singing voice and that she loved to draw, though she'd had little opportunity to practice. They discovered shared humor and shared values, a way of seeing the world that aligned despite their different experiences. Elijah found himself watching Bella constantly, noticing the way she moved, the expressions that crossed her face, the gentle way she held her son. He'd never felt this way about anyone, this urgent need to protect and cherish, this sense that his life had been incomplete until this moment. It terrified him and thrilled him in equal measure. Bella was equally confused by her feelings. She'd been married to Robert, had thought herself in love, but what she'd felt for her husband was nothing like this. Robert had been practical and distant, a man who'd married her because he needed a wife, not because he'd particularly wanted her. She'd been lonely in her marriage, though she'd tried to be a good wife. But with Elijah, everything was different. He looked at her like she mattered, like her words and thoughts were important. He made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced. On the third evening, the storm finally broke. The wind died down and stars appeared in the clearing sky, impossibly bright after days of gray. Elijah stood in the doorway of the cabin, looking out at the snow-covered landscape, and felt Bella come to stand beside him. "It's beautiful," she said softly, the baby asleep in her arms. "It is," Elijah agreed, but he was looking at her, not the stars. Bella met his eyes and her breath caught. There was something in his expression that made her heart race, a hunger and longing that she felt echoed in her own chest. "Elijah," she began, but he stepped back, his face closing off. "We should be able to travel tomorrow," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'll get you to Pendleton, to your sister's house." Bella felt something crack inside her chest. Of course. He'd been helping her out of duty and decency, not because he felt anything for her. She was a widow with a newborn baby, a woman with nothing to offer a man like him. "Yes," she said quietly. "Thank you, for everything." That night, lying on opposite sides of the small cabin, both of them lay awake. Elijah stared at the ceiling and called himself every kind of fool. He wanted to tell Bella how he felt, wanted to ask if she might consider staying with him instead of going to her sister's, but what right did he have? She'd just given birth, just lost her husband months ago. She needed stability and family, not a rancher with a hard life and few comforts to offer. The kindest thing he could do was get her safely to Pendleton and then ride away, even if it felt like tearing his own heart out. Bella held Sam close and tried not to cry. She'd been foolish to think Elijah might care for her as more than a responsibility. He was a good man doing a good deed, and she needed to be grateful for that and nothing more. She would go to her sister's house, raise her son, and try to forget the 3 days in the line shack when she'd felt more alive and seen and cherished than in her entire life. The journey to Pendleton took 2 days. Elijah fashioned a more comfortable travois and they traveled slowly, stopping frequently so Bella could rest and nurse Sam. The tension between them was thick and painful, both of them carefully polite, avoiding the intimacy they'd shared in the cabin. When they finally reached Pendleton, Bella directed Elijah to her sister's house, a neat white structure on a tree-lined street. A woman came running out before they'd even stopped, her face a mixture of relief and worry. "Bella, oh my God, Bella, we thought you were dead. The storm was so terrible, and when you didn't arrive, we thought the worst." Charlotte Fairmont embraced her sister carefully, mindful of the baby. She was older than Bella by 5 years, with the same fair hair but a more careworn face. "And you've had the baby. Oh, let me see him." Bella made introductions, explaining briefly what had happened. Charlotte's husband Martin came out, a thin man with spectacles who shook Elijah's hand with genuine gratitude. "We owe you a debt we can never repay," Martin said. "Please come inside. Stay for supper at least." But Elijah shook his head, his face carefully blank. "I need to get back to my ranch. I've been gone too long already." He looked at Bella and their eyes met for a long moment. "Take care of yourself, Bella, and little Sam." "Elijah, wait," Bella said, but he was already mounting Buck, already turning away. "If you need anything, send word to the Kane Ranch south of town," he called over his shoulder, and then he was riding away, his back straight and rigid, and Bella stood in her sister's yard with tears streaming down her face. "Bella, what happened?" Charlotte asked, her arm around her sister's shoulders. "That man clearly cares about you. Why is he leaving?" "Because I have nothing to offer him," Bella said brokenly. "I'm a widow with a baby. Why would he want me?" Charlotte looked at her sister in exasperation. "Did you tell him how you feel?" "How I feel doesn't matter. He made it clear he was just helping me out of duty." "Men are idiots," Charlotte said with conviction. "Come inside. We need to get you and the baby settled, and then we're going to figure this out." The next weeks were both comforting and painful for Bella. Charlotte and Martin's home was warm and welcoming, and they doted on baby Sam. Bella slowly regained her strength, her body healing from the birth. But her heart felt broken in a way she didn't know how to fix. She kept replaying every moment with Elijah, wondering if she'd imagined the connection between them, the way he'd looked at her, the tenderness in his touch. Charlotte watched her sister mope and finally lost patience. "For heaven's sake, Bella, if you love the man, you need to tell him. Don't let pride or fear rob you of happiness." "What if he doesn't want me?" Bella whispered. "What if he does?" Charlotte countered. "What if he's sitting on his ranch right now, miserable and lonely, thinking you're better off without him? Sometimes people need to be told they're wanted." Bella thought about that. She thought about Elijah's face in the lantern light, the way he'd held her hand through the birth, the hours of talking in the lined shack. She thought about the poems he'd recited, and the way he'd looked at her son with wonder, and how he'd said there was nowhere else he'd rather be. "I need to borrow a horse," she told Charlotte. It was mid-March when Bella rode up to the Kane Ranch, Sam bundled in a sling against her chest. The snow had mostly melted, leaving the landscape brown and muddy but showing hints of green. The ranch was as beautiful as Elijah had described, with rolling hills and a sturdy house and barn. Elijah was in the corral working with a young horse when he saw her. He froze, the rope going slack in his hands, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then he was striding toward her, his face a mixture of shock and hope and fear. "Bella, is everything all right? Is Sam okay?" "We're fine," Bella said, her heart hammering. "I needed to talk to you." Elijah helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering on her waist. "You shouldn't be riding so soon after giving birth. You should be resting." "I'm healed enough," Bella said, "and I couldn't rest, not without telling you something." Elijah waited, his entire body tense, hardly daring to hope. "I know you helped me out of duty and decency," Bella began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know you probably think of me as just a responsibility you had to see through, but those days in the lined shack, they meant something to me. You made me feel seen and valued in a way I've never felt before. And I know I'm just a widow with a baby and I have nothing to offer you, but I'm in love with you, Elijah Kane, and I had to tell you even if you don't feel the same way because I can't live with the regret of not saying it." Elijah stood very still, his face transforming, and then he was cupping her face in his hands, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Nothing to offer me. Bella, you're everything. You're the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. I rode away because I thought you deserved better than a rancher with a hard life ahead, not because I didn't care. I care so much it terrifies me. I've been miserable every single day since I left you, and I was trying to figure out an excuse to come to town just to see you again." "Really?" Bella whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "Really," Elijah said, and then he was kissing her, gentle and reverent, and Bella felt like she was finally home. Sam chose that moment to wake up and squawk indignantly at being squished, and they broke apart with breathless laughter. "He has good timing," Elijah said, looking down at the baby with such love that Bella felt her eyes fill with tears. "Will you have us?" she asked. "Both of us. I know it's a lot to ask, raising another man's child." "Sam's not another man's child," Elijah said firmly. "He's yours, which makes him precious to me, and I was there when he came into this world. I held your hand and helped bring him through. That means something, Bella. That means he's mine too if you'll let him be." Bella did cry then, and Elijah held her and Sam both, the three of them standing in the muddy yard of the Kane ranch while the sun broke through the clouds. They were married in April, a simple ceremony in Pendleton with Charlotte and Martin as witnesses. Bella wore a blue dress that Charlotte had altered to fit, and Elijah wore his only suit, his hair neatly combed and his face clean-shaven. When he said his vows, his voice steady and sure, Bella felt like the luckiest woman alive. Life on the ranch was hard work, but it was also filled with joy. Bella threw herself into making the house a home, sewing curtains and planting a garden and learning to cook on the big iron stove. Elijah built her a chicken coop and surprised her one day with 3 hens and a rooster. Sam grew plump and happy, gurgling and cooing, and Elijah was as devoted a father as any child could want, spending hours with the baby in the evenings, reading to him or just talking while Bella worked. The ranch hands accepted Bella without question, won over by her kindness and her willingness to work hard. She helped with branding and calving, proving herself capable and unafraid of hard work. Elijah watched her fit into ranch life and felt his love deepen every day. That summer was golden. They worked hard from dawn to dusk, but the evenings were theirs, spent on the porch watching the sunset while Sam played on a blanket at their feet. Elijah would read poetry aloud and Bella would draw pictures of the ranch and the mountains beyond. They talked about everything and nothing, building a friendship that deepened their love. "I never knew marriage could be like this," Bella said one evening, her head on Elijah's shoulder. "I never knew it could be partnership and friendship and love all at once." "Neither did I," Elijah admitted. "I thought I'd spend my life alone on this ranch. I never imagined I'd have this, a family, a woman I love more than my own life." "We were lucky that day," Bella said softly. "When the storm hit and you found me, it was the worst day of my life and the best day all at once." "I don't believe in fate," Elijah said, "but I have a hard time believing it was just chance. It feels like we were meant to find each other." In September, Charlotte and Martin came to visit, bringing supplies and gossip from town. Charlotte hugged her sister tight and whispered, "You look so happy. I'm so glad you went after him." "So am I," Bella said. "So am I." They sat around the dinner table that evening. Sam passed from lap to lap, and Bella looked at the faces of the people she loved and felt her heart swell with gratitude. This life, this ranch, this family, it was more than she'd ever dreamed possible. That winter was long and cold, but Bella didn't mind. She'd faced a blizzard and survived, and now she had walls and a fire and Elijah to keep her warm. They spent the short days working and the long nights wrapped around each other, talking and loving and planning for the future. "I want more children," Elijah said one night, his hand on her flat stomach. "If you do, I want this house filled with voices and laughter." "I want that too," Bella said. "I want Sam to have brothers and sisters. I want a full life, Elijah, with you." In the spring of 1883, Bella discovered she was pregnant again. Elijah was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure, memories of Sam's birth still vivid in his mind. "This one will be different," Bella assured him. "This one will be born in a warm house with a midwife and proper care. No blizzards." "I'm holding you to that," Elijah said, but he kissed her and held her close and thanked God for the gift of another child. Their daughter was born in November, a healthy baby with her father's dark hair and her mother's blue eyes. They named her Rose, and Elijah cried when he held her for the first time, this tiny perfect being that he and Bella had created together. Sam, now nearly 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, patting her tiny hand and singing nonsense songs. Elijah watched his son with pride and love, marveling at how completely Sam had become his, how there was no question in his heart or mind that this boy was his child in every way that mattered. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and growth. The ranch prospered, Elijah's hard work and careful management paying off. They expanded the herd, built a bigger barn, hired more hands. Bella's garden flourished, and she began keeping bees and selling honey in town. The house was always full of life, with children running and laughing, friends stopping by, neighbors gathering for barn dances and celebrations. In 1885, they had another son whom they named Daniel. In 1887, twin girls arrived, Grace and Hope, who kept everyone busy with their mischief and energy. The house that Elijah had built for himself, thinking he'd live in it alone, was bursting at the seams with family. "We need to add on," Bella said one evening, looking around the crowded parlor with 5 children playing at various activities. "We're running out of room." "I'll start planning it tomorrow," Elijah said, pulling her into his lap despite her laughing protests that the children were watching. "Anything for you, my love." Sam grew tall and strong, showing a gift with horses that made Elijah proud. When he was 10 years old, he asked the question Bella had been dreading. "Ma, why don't I look like Pa? Or like Rose and Daniel and the twins?" Bella and Elijah exchanged glances, and Elijah nodded, giving her permission to tell the truth. They'd always planned to, but the moment had come sooner than expected. Bella sat Sam down and told him the story of the blizzard, of Robert's death and her desperate journey to Pendleton, of Elijah finding her and delivering him in the wagon. Sam listened with wide eyes, processing. "So Pa's not my real father?" he asked, his voice small. "Sam, look at me," Elijah said, kneeling in front of his son. "I was there when you took your first breath. I held you when you were minutes old. I fed you and taught you and loved you every single day of your life. Blood doesn't make a father, son. Love does. And I love you as much as I love Rose and Daniel and the twins. You are my son in every way that matters. You understand?" Sam looked at his father, this man who had taught him to ride and rope, who read him stories every night, who praised his successes and comforted his failures, and he nodded. "I understand, Pa, and I'm glad you found Ma that day. I'm glad you're my father." Elijah pulled Sam into a fierce hug, his eyes wet, and Bella watched them with tears streaming down her face. "This," she thought, "this is what love looks like. This is what family means." As the children grew, the ranch became more than just a cattle operation. Bella started teaching other ranch women to read and write, holding classes in her parlor. Elijah mentored young cowboys, teaching them not just about ranching but about integrity and hard work and treating people right. The Kane Ranch became known throughout the region not just for its quality cattle but for the kindness and generosity of its owners. There were hard times, of course. A drought in 1888 that nearly broke them. A winter of deep snow in 1890 that killed half the herd. Daniel's bout with scarlet fever that had them praying through the night, Grace falling from a horse and breaking her arm. But they weathered every storm together, their love and commitment to each other, and their family never wavering. In 1895, Sam fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Emma with red hair and a quick laugh. Elijah walked his son through the nervousness of courtship, and Bella helped him pick wildflowers for his beloved. When Sam married Emma in the summer of 1896, both Elijah and Bella cried, proud of the man their son had become. "We're getting old," Bella said that night, lying in bed with Elijah's arms around her. They were in their late 30s, both showing gray in their hair and lines around their eyes. "We're getting better," Elijah corrected, "like fine wine or good leather." Bella laughed and swatted him, but she nestled closer. "I love you, Elijah Kane. Every single day I love you more. And I love you, Bella Kane, my brave, beautiful, impossible wife who rode through a blizzard and gave birth in a wagon and changed my entire life." In 1898, Sam and Emma made them grandparents, a baby boy they named Elijah Samuel. Bella held her grandson and thought back to that terrible, wonderful day 16 years earlier when Sam had been born, when she'd thought she would die alone in the cold. She thought about the stranger who'd stopped to help, who'd held her hand and delivered her baby and looked at her like she mattered. That stranger had become her husband, her partner, the father of her children, the love of her life. "What are you thinking about?" Elijah asked, watching her face. "I'm thinking about how one day can change everything," Bella said. "How if that storm had hit a few hours earlier or later, if you'd taken a different route, if so many things had been different, we might never have met. And I'm grateful, Elijah, for the storm, for your kindness, for every day we've had together." Elijah kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "The storm brought me to you, but it's your love that saved me, Bella. Before you, I had a ranch but not a life. You gave me everything." As the century turned and a new era began, the Kane family gathered on the porch of their sprawling ranch house for a photograph. Elijah and Bella sat in the center, their hair more gray than brown now, their faces lined but happy. Around them stood their children. Sam with Emma and their 3 children, Rose married to a banker from Pendleton with a baby on the way, Daniel courting the schoolteacher, and the twins, now young women, still living at home and full of plans and dreams. The photographer set up his camera and told them to hold still. And as the flash powder exploded, Bella reached for Elijah's hand. He squeezed back, the same way he'd done in the wagon all those years ago, the same way he'd done through births and deaths, and every moment of joy and sorrow in between. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Elijah and Bella sat on the porch swing they'd installed years ago, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the ranch they'd built together. "We did good, didn't we?" Bella asked softly. "We did better than good," Elijah said. "We built something real and lasting. We raised good children who know how to love and work and care for others. We made a life worth living. I wish I could go back and tell that terrified girl in the wagon that everything would be all right," Bella said. "That the man who found her would become her whole world, that she'd have more happiness than she ever imagined possible. She was brave enough to survive until I found her," Elijah said. "She was brave enough to trust a stranger and push through impossible pain to bring Sam into the world. She was brave enough to ride to my ranch and tell me she loved me even though she thought I might reject her. That girl didn't need anyone to tell her things would be all right. She made them all right through her own courage and strength." Bella leaned her head on Elijah's shoulder and felt his arm come around her, strong and steady and sure. They sat there in comfortable silence as the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead. Two people who'd found each other in a blizzard and built a lifetime of love from that desperate, beautiful beginning. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren slept safe and warm. Around them, the ranch they'd built together stretched out in the darkness, full of cattle and horses and life. And in their hearts, the love that had started when a cowboy stopped to help a woman in labor burned as bright and warm as it had 17 years earlier. Proof that even in the coldest storm, even in the darkest moment, hope and love could not only survive but flourish. The legacy of that winter day in 1882 lived on not just in Sam, the baby born in a blizzard, but in every child and grandchild who came after, in the ranch that bore the Kane name, in the stories told around the fire on winter nights about a cowboy who stopped to help and a woman brave enough to love him. It was a story of courage and kindness, of two lonely people who found each other and built something beautiful from nothing but determination and love. And as Elijah and Bella Kane sat together on their porch swing, holding hands as they watched the stars, they knew that their story, which had begun in pain and fear and desperate hope, had transformed into something more precious than they'd ever imagined. A life fully lived, a love deeply felt, and a family that would carry their legacy forward long after they were gone. The Wild West had been hard and unforgiving, a place where survival was never guaranteed and happiness was rarer still. But in that harsh landscape, Elijah and Bella had found each other and carved out not just survival but joy, not just existence but meaning. Their love was the kind that songs were written about, that books told stories of, that people spoke of in reverent tones. And it had all started with a snowstorm, a desperate woman and a cowboy who stopped to help and stayed for a lifetime.